welcome you all. Of course, I'm Maria Baker, you saw me earlier. I want to welcome you all to the fourth, and I would say climactic panel of the conference, right in the middle, central point, and dealing with a very central topic. It was very important to all of the organizers when we were putting the conference together. And this panel is called Faith and Critical Thinking Through the Qur'an. Our first panelist is Dr. Martin Nguyen from Fairfield University. At Fairfield, Dr. Nguyen is an assistant professor of Islamic religious traditions in the Religious Studies Department. His areas of research include the Qur'an and its exegesis, or tafsir, Muslim theology, Sufism, and hermeneutics. He received his PhD from the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University. His book, Sufi Master and Qur'an Scholar Abul Qasim al-Kushairi and Lata'af al-Isharat was published by Oxford University Press in 2012. It explores the confluence of Quranic exegesis, theology, and Sufism in the 5th, 11th century in Nishapur. Professor Nguyen will be speaking to us about the dialectic of revelation, the Qur'an, and systematic theology.
Well, not tired yet. Here we go. The Muslim historian Shamsuddin Muhammad Ahmed al-Lahadi records in his immense chronicle, Tarikh al-Islam, that a major incident of civil strife, Fitna Kubra, erupted in Baghdad in the year 317 Hijri. According to his account, the cause of the disharmony was attributed to a passionate difference of opinion over the meaning of a single verse of the Qur'an, so that your Lord will raise you to a praised station. Al-Lahadi succinctly conveys the nature of the dispute as follows. Quote, the Hanbali said, the verse's meaning is that God seats him on his throne, just as Mujahid explained it. Other scholars said no. Rather, it is the greater intercession that is soundly transmitted in hadith. The dispute and vilification persisted, and they fought one another until many lay slain. End quote. Thus did the fitna of 317 reportedly transpire. Blood was shed and lives were lost upon the fine edge of a single Quranic verse. But my purpose in mentioning this event has nothing to do with the verse in question, or with the specificities of its time, its place, or even of those involved. In fact, whether or not this incident of bloodshed can properly be attributed to an ardent adherence to one interpretive position or another, or whether it masks a larger social or political grievance is irrelevant to my point here. Rather, what this historical flashpoint demonstrates is that questions of theology, particularly those rooted in the meaning of the Qur'an, did and do possess incredible degrees of significance for its advocates and disputants. Accordingly, the subject of my presentation today is Muslim theology. I am not, however, using the term theology as a substitute of translation for a Arabic term like aqidah, ilm al-kalam, or usul al-din. Rather, I'm approaching the work of Muslim theology by embracing the task fully within our operative context, our logos sphere, so to speak, of English. Thus, by theology, I mean theology, that which literally is discourse on God, and more generally refers to the human attempt to apprehend, make sense of, and find fulfillment in the transcendent reality of the Almighty. The manner and modes of theology are manifold. Indeed, today we have before us articulated in this the vision of such contemporary scholars like Farid Assad, Sayyid Muhammad Habib al-Attas, Sayyid Nasir, Tariq Ramadan, and Malcolm X, among others. And despite their differing approaches and agendas, and there are many, they are all engaged in some manner in the project of theology. My aim at present, then, is to, one, propose a possible beginning to a modern systematic Muslim theology, and two, to assert the centrality of revelation for any theology, especially given revelation's conscious and unconscious marginalization within the prism of modernity. I will, however, address these points in reverse. I will first tackle revelation before making some modest propositions on systematic theology itself. begin. I understand theology to be a relational act. Theology unfolds in response to God's revelation. There are, of course, different modes of revelation, but I am concerned with what Izutsu delineates as the verbally articulated ayah or sign. Qur'an, being the speech of God, Kalam Allah, is the defining example of this. So what then is the precise relationship of theology to Quranic revelation? This is what I term the dialectic of revelation. And an archetype for this dialectic is found in the very first occasion of the Qur'an's earthly revelation. Here is the quintessence of the God-human relationship. According to the narration of Aisha, as was related to her by the messenger of God, years after the event, and eventually preserved in Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet Muhammad had secluded himself in the cave of Hira for a series of nights and months of Ramadan. And it was in the quiet of one of these nights that, quote, the real came to him, Ja'al al-Haq. And the angelic intermediary proclaimed the beginning of the Quranic revelation, Iqra, recite. Iqra, an unrelenting and uncompromising command demanding a response. Iqra, the first word of the Quran to break into human history. Iqra, the sounding of revelation that continues on to this day. Let us consider this first Iqra, the unrelenting and uncompromising command in the response. Thrice is the command recite issued, and thrice is a response meekly given. Ma'an al-qari, I'm not a reciter. Or in other accounts, ma'aqrabu, I cannot recite. Or what do I recite? God speaks, and the Prophet attempts to recite. This call and response is the crux of the dialectic of revelation. Moreover, we must imagine that here in this episode, the Prophet Muhammad, in all of his humanness, stands in for the rest of creation. If we look beyond this specific occasion, we indeed find the affirmation of this paradigm abundantly attested elsewhere. Recall in that time, before time, when humankind, Bani Adam, is gathered before God, and God says, Alastu rabbikum qalu bala shahidna. Am I not your Lord? And they said, yes, we do testify. Or when he says to the heavens and the earth, come willingly or by compulsion, they said, we come willingly. Elsewhere, our response is even more immediate and existentially instantiated. Kun fayakun, be and it is. With but the slightest utterance of the divine word, creation springs into being. God speaks, and we respond. Revelation, when they manifest, exerts a gravitational force on those who hear it. Like the Prophet Muhammad before us, we are pulled into its dialectical orbit. The absoluteness of God's utterance lays claim to those it addresses and draws forth from them a response. Whether commanded to recite, to testify, or to exist, a response is precipitated. This dialectic initiated by revelation is not a dance of equals, but a command from creator to creation. Revelation does not reconcile itself to what we think the world to be. It demands the opposite. Revelation asserts the centrality of God while simultaneously decentering all else. Consider too the nature of our responses, the impotence of the prophets, ma'ana al-qari, ma'aqaru, the scrambling bela to acknowledge God's lordship, and the meagerness of our existence in face of the real. We respond in whatever way we can muster, even if poorly so. We respond despite the absolute gulf that divides us from the divine. This speaks to the nature of theology. It must be done with humility. Theology must walk bowed before revelation, recognizing the imperfection and inconstancy inherent to it. A theology formulated in response cannot forget the absolute primacy that revelation demands. In response, we must, drawn out by the imperative gravitas of God's word, recite, come, be. The Qur'an is speaking. How do we respond? Iqra, the first word of the Qur'an to break into human history. The revelation of the Qur'an erupts into the world. It enters with a shattering decisiveness. Indeed, each command to recite is accompanied by a crushing intensity. He pressed me tight and almost stifled me until I thought I would die. Consider two other prophetic reports about the physicality, the physical intensity of revelation. The apostle of God used to move his lips from pain as soon as the revelation began. When Muhammad received the revelation, this caused him much pain, such that he perceived it. He covered his head with his shirt, suffering intensely. I hear sounds like metal being beaten, and then I listen, and often I think I would die. As these reports indicate, there is an element of hardship involved with revelation. It is not an easy thing to bear. With the Word of God comes a share of suffering in this world. That the prophet continued to respond to this revelation, despite the pain that it entailed. That he nonetheless carried on his messengership is telling to us. Theology must likewise be done with a share of suffering in this world. Let us recall Prophet Muhammad's words. Sometimes it comes as the ringing of a bell. This kind is the most painful. Here is the bell that is ringing. Iqra, Iqra, Iqra. Each iteration is like the striking of a hammer upon the bell, although each blow may land upon one specific point. In one specific instant, the sounding of the bell reverberates far beyond that moment in history. Here is the Word of God in its historicity and its eternity. The revelation strikes on that night on Laylatul Qadr with an Iqra of unforgettable profoundness. The Word of God has continued to speak on eternally after. In its infinite dynamism, the Qur'an has continued to speak to all those who have come after. If the endless volumes of commentary and interpretation are any testament, if the lines dedicated to it are any indication, the depths of the Qur'an and its clarity and policy cannot be exhausted by centuries of human response. It continues to speak, provoke, and challenge. It conveys decisively while paradoxically maintaining a boundless openness. The outpouring of revelation is inexhaustible. And if all the trees on the earth were pens and the sea replenished after it by 7 seas, the words of God would not be exhausted. Indeed, God is enlightened and wise. The hammer may have struck in time against the axis of history, but the sounding of revelation continues ever on. Revelation purposely challenges our sense of touch. It is like eternity being poured into history, and history finds itself overwhelmed. Revelation is so total that it demands the moment without partner. The world that we know, or imagine that we know, is radically challenged by God's word, entering the world. The revelation of the Qur'an, in Ash'ari terms, contravenes the habitual norm, the bad, which we finite beings only perceive to be the natural order. Revelation pulls us from our complacency within history. It proclaims to us that there is one like God, that there is a hereafter, that there is life after death. It radically reorients our sense of being and time, diminishing our concern for the immediacy of the present, the temporality of this world, the dunya. It turns us towards the eschaton, al-akhirah, a future godly time that appears ever ahead of us. But we live in deeply uneschatological times. Ours now is more of an age of prognostication, of rational prediction. We have become myopic to the Qur'an's assertions of an eschatological reality. A theology of response, then, must also seek to recapture this reverberating note from on high, that we are hurtling towards an unknown end. History needs to be broken into once again. Iqra, the sounding of revelation that continues down to this day. That first Iqra of the Prophet's lifetime continues to address us now. That first Iqra and all that came after it. Though the prophetic period of Quranic revelation, indeed the age of prophecy itself, has ended, God's divine word continues to communicate to us. Eternally spread revelation is always speaking to us. And so the dialectic presses on. And there is much left for our part to be said. Theology as our response to the divine, must invariably be part of our contemporary considerations of life and the deen. We have lost sight of the awesome transcendence and awful immanence of God. We have lost sight of the eschaton. We must reconsider the nature of our response to the still sounding call of revelation. I believe a systematic theology grounded in the dynamism and constructedness of tradition will provide us with the means to respond and return to that central axis of reality to God. Indeed, the reason that I proceeded to first address this idea of a dialectic of revelation was to illustrate what a systematic theology of the Qur'an might look like, so that you have it. Systematic theology is concerned with first principles. Beginning there, methodically. It seeks to proceed from the most fundamental of matters, like revelation, in order to eventually proceed to more later order issues. It is concerned with constructing a vision of divine reality that is coherent and consistent, without necessarily having to be comprehensive. A systematic theology should also be moving. It is not simply a distillation of the faith, a sterile reduction of dogma to its core matter. It should instead express the fullness of belief with all of its energies. A systematic theology should and must move those who engage with it. It should seek to capture some of the poetic vibrancy of revelation if it is indeed formulated in response to it. And while the topic of revelation is far from exhaustive, other critical concepts remain to be taken up. One of tradition and servitude, theodicy, suffering, and salvation. These too require theological recentering. This, of course, will be work for the religious imagination. But is that not, after all, how we have always answered the call of revelation? Have not our replies possessed a slippery dynamism and diversity across the span of time? When God speaks, we respond.
Our next speaker is Professor Han Mirza of Zaytuna College. Professor Mirza earned his doctorate in religious studies from Yale University in May of 2010, and also studied in a traditional context in Lahore in 1998. And he participated in the master's program at Hartford Seminary in Christian-Muslim Relations, obtaining his master's, I guess, in 2003. Since July 2011, he has been at Zaytuna College in Berkeley, which is the first Muslim liberal arts college in the United States. There, he presently serves as the chair of Faculty Affairs Committee. He is also a visiting scholar at the Center for Islamic Studies at Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Han has served as guest editor of 2 special issues of the Muslim World on Islam in America in 2005 and 2007, as well as the assistant editor for the Princeton Encyclopedia of Islamic Political Thought in 2012. And Professor Mirza will be speaking to us on the topic of signs, not proofs, revelation and iron descent from the sky.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the introduction. It shouldn't come up there if someone's managing it. It's just words. Okay, here we go. The question that this paper seeks to address is the following. Does the Qur'an contain information about the physical world that was unknown to the inhabitants of 7th century Arabia, but was rather revealed for later generations to discover as a sort of proof of its divine origin? In other words, did God place clues in the Qur'an for communities of believers that would live in the centuries following its historical origin? Clues that would unfold with the advance of our knowledge of the physical world. Is the quest for such evidence in the Qur'an delusional? Or is it for the faithful and imperative? What attitude and approach should be adopted towards these questions? This paper confronts the controversial notion of interpreting the Qur'an in light of modern science, known as tafsir ilmi, in specific reference to ayah number 25 of Surah Al-Hadid, which is Surah number 57. So 57:25, this is the ayah I'll be working with. لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ وَأَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدَ فِيهِ بَأْسٌ شَدِيدٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَنْصُرُهُ وَرُسُلَهُ بِالْغَيْبِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَوِيٌّ عَزِيزٌ. So we have, in translation, sent our messengers with clear signs or proofs, and we have sent down with them, أنزلنا الكتاب, the book or the scripture, والميزان, and the scales or the balance, ليقوم الناس بالقسط, so that humanity would abide by justice. وأنزلنا الحديد, and we have also sent down iron. فيه بأس شديد, in it is great power. ومنافع للناس, and benefits for mankind. وَلْيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَنْصُرُهُ وَرُسُلَهُ بِالْغَيْبِ, so that God will make it known who it is who helps him and his messenger in the unseen. Certainly God is powerful and exalted. In his tafsir entitled Tadabbur al-Qur'an, which was authored specifically for this conference, Amir Ahsan Islahi, Amir Ahsan Islahi places this verse in a cluster consisting of verses 25 to 29, which comprises the closing section of the surah. Surah Al-Hadid is otherwise related as a whole to the surah that immediately precedes it, Al-Waqi'ah. I will return to thematic considerations later on. Let us first concentrate on the word choice, anzalna, literally, he sent down or caused to descend in relation to iron. Remember, we have وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ, so he sent down the book and the balance. And then it comes وَأَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدَ, the same word. We have sent down iron. His slide begins by pointing out that the word anzalna probably carries a different sense than its primary literal meaning. He gives the example of its use in this other sense from another verse in the Qur'an, in which anzalna is used in reference to cattle. Although Islahi doesn't mention the verse, it is mentioned by Fakhruddin al-Razi and others in their tafsirs of 57:25. وَأَنزَلَ لَكُم مِّنَ الْأَنْعَامِ ثَمَانِيَةَ أَزْوَاجٍ. So, in this particular ayah, Razi calls this inzal al-insha' wa-tahayyu. So an inzal of bringing up, raising, nurturing, or forming in fashion. The word nuzul occurs in the Qur'an as the welcoming provision and hospitality that a host prepares for his guest upon arrival, like appetizers before the full meal. While the arriving guest is called nazil, one who dismounts or descends. And in the Quran we have this, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ أَلَّا تَخَافُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَبْشِرُوا بِالْجَنَّةِ الَّتِي كُنتُمْ تُوعَدُونَ نَحْنُ أَوْلِيَاؤُكُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ وَلَكُمْ فِيهَا مَا تَشْتَهِي أَنفُسُكُمْ وَلَكُمْ فِيهَا مَا تَدَّعُونَ نُزُلًا. So you will have whatever you desire in the hereafter, and your soul desires, and whatever you ask for, مَا تَدَّعُونَ نُزُلًا, as a welcoming treat. What happens after that is something else. So Islahi elaborates that the use of anzalna in 57:25 corresponds to this usage, clearly stressing that all things ultimately descend from God, who is the source of all that exists. Islahi's last point with respect to anzalna is related to word order. Since ba's precedes manafi', fihi ba'sun shadid, so in the iron is great power, wa manafi'u lin-nas, and benefit for humankind. So the great power for war precedes the benefits. And so in that word order, according to Islahi, he says it emphasizes, according to the theme of the verse, that the primary function of iron is for warfare in order to establish justice. As the verse says, لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. When used in this way, believers assist God and His Messenger, لِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَنْصُرُهُ وَرُسُلَهُ بِالْغَيْبِ, in the unseen. And it is only secondarily for other civilizational and industrial ta'amili and tamaduni benefits. Noteworthy is Islahi's final observation in this connection, that even if iron were no longer to be as central to modern warfare as it had been in the past, the main point of the verse would remain intact, and iron, according to our understanding, should consequently be replaced by any of the other materials that now stand in its place with respect to warfare. So he's giving that primary importance. In other words, for Islahi, iron was mentioned in the verse primarily because its utility as the essential material for warfare, shields, swords, armor, was evident for its immediate audience, the Arabs of the 7th century. Contrast this reading with another approach adopted by the classical exegetes. Islahi dies in 1997, so he's recent. Now we're going to the past, where the literal sense of anzalna in the verse as coming down, particularly from heaven, is maintained through the following hadith. So it is reported in Allah Ta'ala, anzala arba'a barakatin min as-sama', that God sent down 4 blessings from the sky or the heaven, ila al-ard, to the earth. Anzala al-hadid, He sent down iron, wan-nar wal-ma' wal-milh, and fire and water and salt. Although Islahi is keen to maintain a sense of relevance for the modern reader, he does it by sidestepping the primary literal sense of the word anzalna, which means to send down, and is the same word used earlier in the verse for al-kitab wal-mizan. Now, repetition of a word, there's anzalna twice in this verse, no sign of eloquence unless it is done for some purpose, such as contrast in shades of meaning of anzalna, or emphasis, or precision. And the sense of anzalna could indeed be seen to vary when applied diversely to al-kitab, al-mizan, and al-hadid. However, what I am interested in is whether there are ways to give coherence to the literal sense in light of modern science, given that iron is a physical entity that is very much related to modern cosmology. Could it be that the Qur'an is actually asking us to think deeply about the word choice, anzalna, in this ayah today? أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ? Anzalna, iron and modern science. Let me just read a section from a simple article titled Iron Meteorites. And now some of this is going to become very popular. You might have run across links in websites. But just bear with me. So an article entitled Iron Meteorites, The Hearts of Long Vanished Asteroids, authored by an avid meteor hunter to help the general public better understand how the universe works with meteorites. Astronomers, and I'm quoting, astronomers believe that at least some asteroids in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter once had molten cores, and these bodies were the parents of iron meteorites. Their cores are believed to have been heated by radioactive elements to have reached temperatures around 1,000 degrees Celsius. The eminent meteoriticist Dr. Brian Jones of the Institute of Meteoritics in Albuquerque succinctly explains the result, quote within a quote. In a melted asteroid, melted rocky material and melted metal do not mix. The two liquids are like oil and water and stay separate. We have oil, we have rocks, and we have metal. Metal is much denser than the rocky liquid, so metal sinks to the center with gravity of the asteroid and forms a core. End quote within a quote. I'm still quoting. This liquid metal consists largely of iron and nickel, which cooled very slowly over a period of millions of years, resulting in the formation of a crystalline alloy structure visible as the Wittgenstein pattern in iron, and some stony iron meteorites that have been sectioned and etched. So people have studied these patterns, and from the crystalline structure they can say, well, it didn't cool here, it cooled in outer space, and so that's where it comes from. A catastrophic event that led to the destruction of some of these asteroids, that leads to a collision with another substantial body, scattered iron nickel fragments into space. Occasionally these fragments encounter our planet and hurtle melting through our atmosphere. Those that survive and land upon the Earth's surface are iron meteorites. Okay, so this is pretty well established as far as I know. I'm a little nervous because we have astrophysicists in the audience and other eminent scientific scholars, so it's not scholars of science. But I'll continue. That should do it in my mind for Wa'anzal al-Hadid when it comes down. Now for the more interesting, فِيهِ بَأْسٌ شَدِيدٌ. In it is great power. I'm going to invite us to think about this in a certain way too. Let's look at the formation of stuff in the universe. By stuff, I mean all the elements beyond hydrogen and helium, the physical, chemical ingredients necessary for life, as well as everything that we see on Earth, including iron. Where does this come from? So, very quickly, what happens, according to our present understanding, is that stellar, interstellar material, which consists mostly of hydrogen, begins to gravitate and coalesce, and then when it gets really close to itself in a big, giant, gaseous thing, because of the pressure and gravity at the center, the hydrogen atoms begin to fuse together. And they produce helium, which releases energy, and this is what becomes the sun. Okay? And this is what we see as the stars. Now, if the size of this gaseous thing is not too great, it will just burn out. But if it's huge, then eventually, because of the pressure, that helium will also begin to combust, or actually fuse, and it will form higher order elements. Okay? And this continues until the helium turns into carbon, which turns into other things like oxygen, silicon, and ultimately iron. After iron, it goes nowhere, because the strongest nuclear forces of any known element is in iron. Okay, iron is at, I'm quoting here from one of the various sources I looked up, this is standard understanding as far as I know. Iron is at the middle point of terms of nuclear size, in terms of nuclear size, where either adding or removing particles would result in a higher energy configuration, so it is regarded as the most stable nucleus. فِيهِ بَأْسٌ شَدِيدٌ. It's a totally different meaning, right? Okay. And then what happens, okay, when you have an iron core, is if the pressure is still too great, it doesn't fuse to become another element. And there's different things that can happen depending on the size, but one of the things is that the protons outside, or the electrons that are floating in the sea, will penetrate that nucleus and neutralize the protons. And what you'll have is just a mass of neutrons left. Okay, when that happens, a bunch of neutrinos are released, and the mass of that core is, it's called the collapse, a catastrophic collapse. And to give you an idea, the radius goes from something like the size of the Earth to a 50-kilometer size in a second. And then when it comes down to where it can no longer compress, you have a shock wave of this massive thing that's coming in and it bounces back. And all kinds of things and reactions happen. And you have shock waves at the speed of the relative velocity of light. And the descriptions here is from the University of Ohio State website, where they talk about this for the purpose of pedagogy. It's quite exciting. A blast wave smashes outward through the star. Explosive nuclear fusion in the wake of shock produces more heavy elements. Shock violently heats and accelerates the stellar envelope. And then you have a supernova, shock breakout, star brightness to 10 billion times the brightness of our sun. In minutes. It can outshine an entire galaxy, which consists of billions of stars. This is called a supernova. And you see this bright light in the sky, and you see one every now and then. I'm quoting from the site here. Supernova explosions are responsible for creating nearly all of the heavy elements seen in nature, with a few important exceptions, and I was very curious about those after looking into it. The universe starts out with only hydrogen, 75%, helium about 25%, and then spattering, so just slightly less than 75, like 25, of other like metals. Most other elements are formed by nuclear reactions occurring inside of stars or in the final moments of supernova explosions. So everything that we see is formed as a result of this explosion, the iron core being instrumental in its formation, and then the blast and shock wave scatters it about into the space, and then it eventually finds its way in you and me, and everything we see. Okay, that's what we're talking about. وَأَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدِ, so it comes down. فِيهِ بَأْسٌ شَدِيدٌ. All right. Let me say a few things about thematic considerations, and I'll conclude by inviting us to think about this. What am I doing with this? Okay. Before concluding, let's turn to a few thematic considerations that make the case even more compelling. So the previous surah is Surah Al-Waqi'ah, all right? Now, Islahi, I turn back to him. He draws three different connections between, or two different ones, and I'm proposing a third. So there's a ma'nawi connection in that Surah Waqia focuses on the hereafter and the conditions of people in the hereafter, as does quite a bit of Surah Al-Hadid from different perspectives. There's also a linguistic connection, very obvious, where the last ayah of Surah Waqia is إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ حَقُّ الْيَقِينِ فَصَبِّحْ بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ. So this is certainly the truth, the haqqul yaqeen, certain truth of certainty. فَصَبِّحْ, so glorify بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ, the name of your Lord, be exalted. And then Surah Al-Hadid, that's the last verse in Surah Waqia. And Surah Al-Hadid begins, سَبَّحَ لِلَّهِ. So the verse ends, سَبِّحْ, glorify, and then the next surah, which is Al-Hadid, begins, سَبَّحَ لِلَّهِ. And that's actually the beginning of a section of surahs called the Musabbihat, which has سَبَّحَ لِلَّهِ and يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ, 6 of the 10 of them that begin in that manner. So you have these connections. But right in the last tail end of Surah Waqia, it's a very interesting set of ayats. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ. Nay, I swear by the setting or the location of the stars. Mawaqi', the place of happening. وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ. And this is, if you only knew, an awesome oath. إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ. This is a glorious one. So there's very interesting stuff happening with the cosmos, the stars, and if you take this as anzalna. Let me go into Surah Hadid, the first 4 verses. It begins, سَبَّحَ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. So everything in the heavens and the earth glorifies God. And you can do a lot with these ayat, I just don't have the time. And He is the exalted and the wise. لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He has the dominion of everything in the heavens and the earth. يُحْيِي وَيُمِيتُ وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. He gives life and death, and He has over all things power. هُوَ الْأَوَّلُ وَالْآخِرُ. If you start to think of this in cosmic terms, in terms of cosmic scale, He's the first and the last, وَالظَّاهِرُ وَالْبَاطِنُ, and the most apparent and the most hidden. And this is the only place in the Qur'an where you have wow in between the attributes of God. Everywhere else, it comes without a conjunction. Al-Malik al-Qudus al-Salam al-Mu'minun. But here you have al-awwal wal-akhir wal-zahir wal-batin. وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ, and He has of all things knowledge. And then هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ فِي سِتَّةِ أَيَّامٍ ثُمَّ اسْتَوَىٰ عَلَى الْعَرْشِ. Now for those of you working on ring theory and circularity, watch this. يَعْلَمُ مَا يَلِجُ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَمَا يَخْرُجُ مِنْهَا. He knows that which penetrates the earth and that which comes out of it. وَمَا يَنْزِلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. And He knows what comes down from the sky. وَمَا يَعْرُجُ فِيهَا. And that which ascends into it. وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. He is with you wherever you are. وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. Okay? Now towards the end of the surah, before ayah 25, which I'm working on, you have this wonderful place that talks about the hereafter. اعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد. So know that the life of this world is display and pastime, and that's also 5 very interesting descriptions. كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته. Like rain, whose the farmer wonders at it, the stuff that grows from it. And here's the word kuffar is used literally as a farmer. So could this be a hint, like look at what's coming up literally at some point when you find it interesting in the 20th century. And then it talks about, so it's talking about the farmer and what comes out from the ground. So there you have what comes into the ground and what comes out of it. And then a few verses later, you have وَأَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدِ. So you have this a closure of what goes into the ground, and then a closure of what comes on from high. All right, did that a little bit quickly, but let me conclude. The question is, what are we to do with all this? What am I saying? In his article on scientific exegesis of the Qur'an, a viable project, Mustansir Mir offers several objections to such scientific readings of the Qur'an. He's not particularly against it, but he says, I'm not sure if it will work, it could work, and so he gives both sides before assessing it. But here's one of the objections that he raises, and I think the most compelling one. That science is changeable, and that it is wrong to interpret the Qur'an in light of science, since not only scientific discoveries, but scientific paradigms too become outdated. In my conclusion, I would like to propose the following approach to tafsir al-ilm. It should be considered as something natural, and one of the many ways in which the meaning of the Qur'an can be illuminated. How could it be otherwise for a book that claims to provide eternal guidance for humanity? Why would it not be that in different times and places, different verses would connote unique meanings based on circumstantial epistemic horizons? These meanings are neither exclusive nor universal, but context-specific. And that the Qur'an has the ability to do this compellingly over the course of history is the real story. It may be that in any given age, a sufficient number of verses remain operational at multiple levels. In our age, also at an ilmi level, in order to persuade the mutadabbirin that it is of divine origin. Such verses should be considered tentative at best, or I should say interpretations, and engaged for their persuasive force as signs instead of rational airtight proofs that set particular meanings and paradigms in stone. Of course, like any persuasive argument, interpreters may present their insights with more or less eloquence, but that is certainly beside the point, for the same is the case for any kind of interpretive exercise, be it traditional, mystical, rational, linguistic. In the approach to tafsir ilmi suggested here, objections that appeal to the limits of scientific knowledge and shifting paradigms fall away. It also opens up possibilities to view the history of tafsir in new light, with shifting emphases in shifting contexts, seen not negatively, but yes, miraculously. It would also help scientific moderns consciously acknowledge that their scientific horizons are no less contingent than other epistemic frameworks, past, present, and future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahan. I think I can fairly say I will never read Surah Al-Hadid the same way again. After that, thank you very much. Very interesting. All right, our next speaker is Basit Karim Iqbal. Basit is an editor based in Toronto whose research interests lie at the intersection of the anthropology of Islam and continental philosophy of religion. He completed his master's thesis titled Chronopolitics of Allegory into Lal Assad's Anthropology of Secularism in January 2012. A forthcoming article addresses the curious hiatus granted Sunni messianism by the Italian political philosopher Giorgio Agamben. Basit's recent work has included substantive and editorial contributions to the 7-volume reference work, The Integrated Encyclopedia of the Qur'an, the first volume of which was just published this month. And Basit will be speaking to us on the subject of critique, Quranic studies, and form of life, contemporary critical practices reprised. Thank you.
So Islamic studies in the modern university is periodically rocked by polemics protesting the religious contamination of the academy. A recent issue of the journal includes in the study of religion, for instance, featured a provocation on this question, followed by several responses. In the study of Islam before and after September 11th, Aaron Hughes observes that academic Islamic studies is largely proven immune as a quote to critical turns in religious studies. Islamicists are pressured to correct negative stereotypes of Islam and seek to protect their object of study by shielding and so enclosing it. resulting in what Hughes calls a soft post-colonialism. Descriptive as opposed to analytical, better? Authenticity rather than hybridity, coherence instead of dissonance. Descriptive as opposed to analytical, authenticity rather than hybridity, coherence instead of dissonance. These are the regrettable terms of Islamic studies today, by his account. He continues, scholars routinely choose to selectively shape their work in the image of an essentially private and non-violent Islam. Such liberal approaches ironically prove the mirror image to neoconservative renditions of Islam, and that each ultimately create an essential and one-dimensional Islam, whether peaceful or bellicose, democratic or anti-democratic, that is contingent on political expediency. He invokes basically a law of genre to demarcate apologetic and critical approaches to the study of Islam. Hughes' article is followed by a number of responses which variously grapple with his provocation. The response by Ruth Moss in particular is exceptional for the way he traces the stakes of the question of critique. The difference between criticism and critique and the secularity of critique have each in recent years been the topic of productive and heated disagreements, respectively, between, for instance, Salah al-Assad and Judith Butler, and Salman Mahmoud and Silas Bergouris. But I'm not going to focus on Hughes' article or these other debates in this presentation. I only mention them in order to note first that this sort of imperative to critique, to reach beyond simple description for critical analysis, recurs across the disciplines of the modern humanities in an effort to think to the limits of the thought. Second, the very terms of discussion between critique and criticism, the emancipatory promise of critique against practical conditions, are both deeply contested. The critical impulse, by this measure, refuses what is given. Instead, it seeks what has produced the given. By some readings, this tension is evident in the various cultural wars in the academy, and more generally in the insistence that theology and philosophy are distinct faculties. They are each held to offer distinct modes of knowledge, faith and reason, apologetic and critical. But are such distinctions tenable? How are they maintained? Need such a division underpin the question of critique? Simply drawing a boundary between theology or belief and philosophy or reason is not a solution, because it only opens the question of the relationship between them, as to whether one has primacy over the other, or whether their relationship is decidable at all. I will briefly return to Hughes' provocation later, but for now I focus more extensively on an earlier and more sophisticated version of such an exhortation, Muhammad Arkun's essay, Contemporary Critical Practices in the Qur'an, which is published as the first chapter of his Islam to Reform or to Subvert, and in a less convoluted translation as an entry in Bill's Encyclopedia of the Qur'an. Most broadly, I argue that one reading of Arkun's essay allows us to glimpse a vision of critique that is less divisive than dialectical. Even while the topics and oppositions that are echoed in Hughes' article, that is, Arkun's essay tries to clear the space for a Quranic studies that is transformed beyond the divisions it began with. But this reading of Arkun's essay ultimately calls into question the possibility of achieving his promise. Arkun opens his essay on the dismal state of the field with an image of divisions. Every scholar lives within the confines of a specialty which can become a private kingdom, he says. But this knowledge lacks any real basis. Instead, it is secured only by its performative felicity, each within its own fiefdom. Meanwhile, in various Islamic contexts, reason multiplies its own traits. This is Islamic. Quranic studies scholars who focus on questions of etymology, codicology, origins, and so on, he writes, neither address questions of methodology or epistemology, nor truly grapple with the question of religious meaning. By this, it's important to note, he doesn't mean how believers understand the Quran. Rather, he calls researchers to problematize the systems that produce meaning. This, he writes, would liberate the problematic of the Quran from its isolation from the historical perspective of modernity. The new critical study Arkun envisions is one that, in his words, integrates theological meaning, theological reasoning into a methodological program for an epistemology of historical research. What does that mean? Specifically, he calls for different disciplinary approaches. He mentions historical psychology, sociology, and anthropology, being introduced into Quranic studies in trying to understand the development and consolidation of Quranic meaning beyond issues of narrative and description. An emphasis on the ulama and various canonical commentaries ought to be unsettled by a complementary attention to popular culture and heterodoxy, without either giving way to a reductive atheistic approach or censoring oneself for fear of offending Muslim sensibilities. For what Argun advocates as the primary task of the social sciences is a rigorous and definitive deconstruction of all orthodoxies. What's authorized as sacred, that is, must be recognized in fact to be sacralized in operation of power. There should be no question of screening these constructions of faith from historical research or from a critical assessment, he writes. This is a project Muslims ought to participate in, he says, and room should be given this to contribute. For to pretend otherwise would impose an artificial distinction between academic research and what he calls the effervescent productions of history. His vision of a new Quranic studies is fundamentally based on the integration of its two central categories. He says, the epistemological criterion used here is open to debate, provided that the essential distinction between the disposition of belief and that of critical reason be respected. While no claim can be made for the superiority of one over the other, there are important differences separating the two states of cognition in terms of function, choice, aims, interests, and results. Hughes also echoes this sort of fundamental division, but to less productive effect. Argun thus insists on double critique, both of the militant secularist approach as intertwined with various kinds of academic arrogance, and also of the massive domain of the Muslims, what he calls the Muslim scholarly unthought. This latter realm can be approached to what he calls the concept of a closed official corpus, which names the way orthodoxy works to contain the potentially radical significance of texts in a dogmatic enclosure. An uncharted wilderness grows between these two regimes of knowledge at their limit in the border marches of the kingdoms of scholarship. And in transcending each, Argun's double critique seeks to liberate believing Muslims and Orientalist scholarship and social scientific works altogether from that dogmatic enclosure. So there are different ways to approach this argument, but perhaps counterintuitively, I'm going to push further the moment in which he invokes Nietzsche as exemplary of a certain model of critique. The point is not, he writes, to demonstrate the scientific validity or the irrationality of articles of faith, but rather to trace their genealogy from Nietzsche's perspective of the criticism of values as well as their psychological functions and decisive role. So he refers to Nietzsche, who is the exemplary point man for various forms of critique. But what I have to do briefly is to follow an secularist deconstructive reading to show that Nietzsche may not be so easily pressed into the service of such criticism. Avicenna writes that for Nietzsche, the process of translation, by which existence, religious or otherwise, is rendered into symbols, is a process of carrying such religious life beyond itself. For Nietzsche, the fundamental inheritance of Christianity is the translation of Jesus' life into a symbol. And this form of representation is fundamentally one of decay. For Nietzsche, especially in his books The Antichrist, the death of Jesus and its translation becomes paradigmatic for a form of scholarship that translates life beyond its death. Such representations are released from death because they separate life from itself. They symbolize life, but are not themselves life, because they seek an existence outside time and so beyond death. Nietzsche writes that there is a distance involved in this kind of scholarship, a mad logical separation from time and a return to time, a liberation from death and history that is also a process of decay. What Nietzsche calls for, out of secular reading, is not this sort of translation and symbolization and representation. What he advocates instead is recognition that the history of the thing defies definition. It refuses this translation and rendition that gives the death of life, the force of scholastic decision. The implicit challenge in all of this is that one cannot answer the undefinability of something historical simply by being more historical. One cannot solve the problem of symbolic representation, its meaning, by further historicization. This sounds a lot like Argun, in noting that even secular scholars have avoided addressing the problem of religious meaning. What Nietzsche calls the crystallized unity of the synthesis of meaning is simply not available to definition. It is only after scholars perform the work of translation, separation, and the death of life that it is removed from time and open to historicizing. So, what does all this Nietzsche have to do with the question of critical Quranic studies? For one thing, it suggests that the approach Argun calls for would have to reckon first of all with the disciplinary practices that constitute religious life, which itself cannot be historicized, accounted for, qualified, differentiated, and so on. The division between apologetic and critical Islamic or Quranic studies is here entirely reconfigured. This doesn't mean that the conversation is over. There remain a variety of other scholarly approaches that one could take, alternative to this work of historicization. So al-Asad, for example, refuses to understand religion and disciplinary practices in the historicist terms that subsume and translate life into a metaphor or a symbol. He writes, "The interesting thing about symbols is that they invite one to do a reading of them independently of people's stated intentions and commitments. Disciplined life resists symbolization. It is a matter of cultivation, of practices, of virtues, attitudes, and sensibilities. Symbols, he says, call for interpretation, and even as interpretive criteria are extended, so interpretations can be multiplied. On the other hand, disciplinary practices cannot be so easily varied, because learning to develop moral abilities is not the same thing as learning to invent interpretations. Hence his various refusals to historicize as symbols the Christian liturgies of medieval monasticism, violent practices in France, or practices of criticism in Saudi Arabia. For Asad, therefore, all life is what Dirty Ogaban calls form of life, a life that can never be separated from its form, a life for which what is at stake in its way of living is life itself." So, in wrapping up, I just want to make two more points. First, this is a question of the way each of these efforts at critical study affectively configure the field of scholarship. Hugh's division between critical and apologetic studies polarizes the study of Islam. Some ask the tough questions, others are soft post-colonialists. This generates and accelerates a decision machine which congeals an anxiety to shadow every question and answer. Am I being critical enough? Hughes advocates asking the tough questions. The obvious question there is tough on whom and to what effect. But if we can instead unsettle this polarity between apologetic and critical approaches, insider and outsider positions, we can try to decelerate this decision machine between soft and hard. And perhaps as in the first presentation today, allow the thunderclap of meaning to take place. So, stillness. Second, there are different models at work here for the relationship between philosophy and theology, critical and apologetic, insider and outsider. Hughes starkly divides them into an opposition. Arcoon instead goes further. In the moments when he remarks the potential of an integrated Quranic studies, it is possible to see how, when pushed to their limits, the so-called insider and outsider modes of cognition might transform into one another. His critique of Quranic studies tacks back and forth between different regimes of knowledge in order to reach a state of research outside each of them. This is a fundamentally dialectical approach. But is this sufficient? Or are there other ways of configuring these questions beyond a sharp division or dialectics? I don't have time to go into this now, but in the first chapter to a marvelous slim book, Daniel Barber has articulated a typology of different configurations of this relationship in Christianity. So he's got 4 different approaches, and the final one he talks about is what he calls philosophical excess, which is something he inspired by Spinoza and reflected to a certain extent in certain post-secular figures. What Barber's book offers, beyond the questions that could yet be raised over how and whether Islam fits into the coordinates he maps, is a model of a generative indeterminacy that is not dialectical between philosophy and theology. Instead, it is a relay by which interpretation jumps from one to the other. In short, critique, its promise and its aporia, cut diagonally across both critical and apologetic approaches.
Thank you, Bassett. Very interesting paper, very thought-provoking paper, a lot of questions in there. Our final speaker today is Isra Ezigiolu from St. Joseph's University. And Isra received her master's degree from Hartford Seminary and her PhD from the University of Virginia. Her research focuses primarily on the Quranic interpretation of Sayyid Nursi, and she has a book forthcoming from Penn State University Press, Understanding the Quranic Miracle Stories in the Modern Age. And maybe we'll get a little taste of that in her presentation today. Today she'll be speaking to us about belief in heaven and hell in this day and age, Sayyid Nursi's interpretation of the hereafter in the Qur'an.
life after death. He claimed that it detracts from living life fully here and now on earth. He famously advised sticking to the earth and not believing in any world other than the present one we live in. Writing 7 decades later, the Quranic exegete and Quranic theologian Bediüzzaman Said Nursi also talked about a new age. According to Nursi, the shell of taqlid in faith, that is imitative faith based on imitation or almost inherited across generations, just unwittingly, that shell has been shattered, and nothing less than a faith based on reasons, iman al-tahqiqi, will survive in the modern era. Moreover, distinct from many of his contemporaries, Nursi comments extensively on the theme of life after death in the Qur'an. Given the widespread skepticism about religious belief that marks our era, the Quranic emphasis on life after death sounds almost counterintuitive. This word seems much more real and much more important than a world to come. Moreover, the Quranic descriptions of hell reserved for unbelievers sound too harsh to many of us, because many of us in the modern world do not regard unbelief as a vice anymore, let alone worthy of punishment. Nursi's approach to the Quranic passages on life after death reflects an awareness of these challenges. In what follows, I shall discuss some of the ways in which this theme of the Qur'an is discussed in Nursi's magnum opus, the Risale-i-Nur, literally the epistles of light. This goes for a number of volumes, and it was mainly written in Ottoman Turkish, with some crucial parts penned in Arabic. Risale-i-Nur is not a running commentary on the Qur'an. It doesn't go verse by verse. Rather, the text is often thematically arranged and is saturated with either direct or indirect references to the Quranic text. In the Risale, Nursi attempts to present an interpretation of the Qur'an in a way that appeals to both the heart and the intellect. So Nursi talks a lot about life after death, and so I tried to kind of simplify it and categorize it, so it's going to be, it doesn't represent the whole thing, but just some of the points that I wanted to highlight. So the first question about hereafter is, why believe in the existence of an unseen world? As is well known, the Quran clearly acknowledges this question and responds to it. And the crucial portion of the Risale-i-Nur is spent on engaging these Quranic passages, these Quranic arguments about life after death. And as I noted earlier, in the Risale-i-Nur, there's this idea that faith cannot be blind. That is, even though the object of faith exceeds human rationality and imagination, the way, the path to go to get there must be based on the visible world. That is, faith in unseen, in the ghaib, must be based on faith on the ayn al-shahada, the visible world. Nursi uses this metaphor of science, a very common reference in the Quran. Now, Nursi engaged with these science in two levels, both in the level of outer science, that is science out there in the world, as well as inner science, that is science within human nature. An important text in the Risale-i-Nur is the treatise on resurrection, which spans over 50 pages, and it starts with a key passage from the Quran. And there are many passages like this in the Quran. So this one is saying, look at the human being, these signs of God's grace, how He gives life to the earth after it has been lifeless. Verily, the same God is indeed the one that can bring the dead back to life, for He has the power to bring anything. In this treatise, written in an accessible style intended actually for a common reader, Nursi discusses how the nature is full of signs of the existence of a merciful, wise, and knowing Maker who, of course, can and will kindly open up a new realm after death. Now, I'm going to skip much of the treatise here, much of the main arguments, but one I want to highlight here. To start with, Nursi says, we observe beauty, wisdom, mercy, purpose, and even justice in the way things are run in this world, in the way things are arranged. So following the Quranic discourse on the natural phenomena, he gives various examples from the natural world. Life springs out of inanimate substances before our very eyes, in plants, animals, and humans. Each species is given appropriate and abundant sustenance and tools for life. The infants are taken care of mercifully, sun and the galaxies work in harmony, and so on. At times, from time to time, Mercy also makes use of modern science. And so he talks about the delicate and incredible organization of blood vessels and cells, and the interconnectedness of all beings and the universe. His basic conclusion from all this is that the fact that the needs are being taken care of wisely and mercifully, and the way the things run in the world reveal the incredible power and creativity of one, this being, this unseen being behind the scenes. Now, Mercy notes, if the world reveals this maker behind the scenes, then it also reveals life after death. And he asks the reader to reflect on the following question. Is it possible that the one who has such incredible wisdom, mercy, beauty, and power would allow human beings to be trashed at the end, with no injuries beyond this life? How would such a creator, who takes care of the needs of your stomach by creating such a variety of foods, would ignore your human yearning for eternity, full justice, and enduring beauty? How would the merciful and wise arranger of your body, the one who would even heal your skin cuts, ignore your deepest wounds of finitude and finitude? Thus, for Mercy's approach, life after death is not an optional, dispensable topic on life. Rather, it comes as part of the package. That is, if we see in this life instances of real beauty, real mercy, real wisdom, and even signs of justice, then there must be a life after death, where these attributes will more fully manifest. Otherwise, we will have to come back and deny the very beauty, mercy, and wisdom we see in the world. We have to declare that all this intricate planning is for no purpose other than destroying and destruction. And actually, wisdom is ultimately absurdity, and passing beauty is actually ugly. And what appears to be mercy is actually cruelty. Because it's cruel for someone to make you taste something beautiful, make you long for more, and then deny that to you. So, in the chart, I try to kind of map the way mercy is arguing here. You start with the world, you see these manifestations that anyone, mercy is assuming anyone who has an effect on life will say that I have noticed mercy. I have had experiences where there is power in it, beauty. I have experienced beauty in life. And then if so, there has to be someone behind, because all of these are passing, there must be someone behind the scenes who is the source of this. And then, if there is such a source, there has to be life after death, where all of these will manifest fully. If not, you have to come back and deny what you have seen. You have to say beauty is ugliness, wisdom is absurdity, mercy is cruelty. Now, what is noteworthy for me is the way in which Mercy connects a careful reflection on natural world with a keen focus on human soul. Hence, his very attempt to show how life after death is real is inherently linked with the idea that it is utterly relevant for human existence. Indeed, elsewhere, Mercy argues how belief in life after death has immediate implications for personal and social life. At the personal level, Mercy argues that belief in life after death enables human beings to embrace their comprehensive potential. He says that human beings have an immense capacity to relate to care about, and to love so many beings. And think of your relation to your family, to your friends. You even care about the beautiful fish in the ocean, deep in the ocean, or sunrise, or what happens in the galaxy. So human being has immense curiosity and ability to care about so many things around her or him. And he claims that, unlike other creatures, the capacities of human beings do not have a natural limit. Sarah, I don't know if I mixed up. He claims that human beings have capacity of love and attachment that's limitless, and that something that's assumed to be eternal. He argues that we all want eternity in the sense that we all, actually this is my interpretation of it, but we all want eternity in the sense we all want love, happiness, and beauty eternally. Now, another essential aspect of being human, this also notes, is our ability to have a time frame much more than current moment. So as human beings, we can dwell in and even imagine our past, and we can be concerned and dream about our future. And so we live in a moment, even as we live in the present, we are inhabiting a time frame much broader than the present. So much so that if someone is, just to give this example, if someone was to be hanged, like, 10 minutes, I'm going to give you capital punishment. And whatever pleasure you give him at that point, he won't enjoy it. Because he's not going to say, at 10 minutes, let me enjoy this delicacy. No. So he emphasizes how your perception of time immediately affects how you experience present here and now. And taking cue from the Quranic style, Nursi also often brings in contrast. So he elaborates on this picture of this belief, that if someone was actively believing, and I'm saying actively, that there is no life other than this world, that all this comprehensive human nature becomes a burden, a liability. Because because we have so many connections, not only that we dread our finitude, but we also care about the finitude of all the things that we're connected with. And every day and each moment retreats to this, what Nursi calls a cemetery of the past, leaving memories of utter transience. We as human beings are each surrounded by separation and death through and through, of loved ones, of familiar ones, of living beings associated with our lives, of cherished moments. And he emphasizes, and dwells in this a lot actually, that this feeling itself, this perception itself is hellish. This is why Nursi argues that there is so much pain in this belief in God. The Quranic description of hell, therefore, is simply an externalization of what is already implicit in our choices of disbelieving and resisting to them. Nursi argues that not only our personal peace, but also our virtues depend on belief in life after death. There is again this idea of how we are oriented in time affects our relationships with others. For instance, if I just use myself, if you actively reject life after death, then it means that you will be with your parents only through this temporary life. That's how you perceive it. Then, Nursi argues, your commitment to them, your sincerity and devotion to them will be limited, because these are people whom you did not know before. You met them here in this temporary world, and you will soon separate without ever meeting again. When we orient ourselves within this finite time frame, our human ability, or even a tendency to care deeply, to be devoted to our relationships, and our commitment to elevated virtues will diminish dramatically. In contrast, Nursi argues that when we realize that our relationships have an eternal horizon, that, for instance, my relation with my parents or my beloved spouse extends beyond death to an eternal realm, then I can be more compassionate, I can be more caring and more genuine. And if I am aware of this, and Nursi is very clear about that, it's not about labeling people, it's about really awareness. If you are aware of this belief in life after death, then you're less likely to betray your relationships for the sake of temporary grudges, or manipulate your relationships for the sake of your benefits. In sum, engaging with the Quran thematically, Nursi turns Nietzsche's claim that life after death detracts from this world on its head. He claims that it actually enables human beings to make sense of all their experience of beauty and wisdom and in this world. It also enables them to flourish as human beings here. And so he highlights immense human yearning for eternity and the evidences of life after death present in nature. And finally, just as a recap, he also presents belief and unbelief as pleasurable and painful in themselves, as opposed to being neutral choices that only later in the judgment day get attached with some reward or punishment. So as I have said, he claims over and over again that this believing in God and hereafter actually so revealing that it actually contains the seed of paradise. And this belief in God and I thought about it is actually so painful for human heart that it contains a seed of hell in it. Thus, in this interpretation of hell and heaven, these are hell and heaven are not just external entities that we will meet someday in the distant future, but also they exist here and now, and making belief in them more relevant and tangible.
All right, I'd like to get open the floor for questions. For very thoughtful.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
It is on. Okay. Mohan, this is wonderful, very interesting take on the scientific explanation of that. But I'm just worried, so
Yes.
let me address my worry in the following fashion. One thing is there's some connection between the scientific explanation and what is in the Quran, and we are really contingent on each other, so that the explanation you give will turn out in 10 years from now on, and the fact we address it. That's part of the problem. Another part of the problem, what we do with the ancient science that developed. Our problem is, for example, there's already have a magnificent and detailed argument about cosmology, that's more sufficient than the indices in the Quran, and whether we consider this as divine because at one point we confirm with this in Aristotle and Panel4, maybe and so on. How we handle that. Third thing is like, why are we doing this? Why we can't, like, for example, when Newton found a way to fit the field of metaphysics in his science, and we have a Newton, for example, given the absolute, the concept of time or space and absolute attribute of God. In this way, we have the science here, and we have the metaphysics here, so we can do that. That's my way. Quick question for Basit. I love your presentation as much as I can to grasp and that notion of the tension between theology and between apologetic and critical is fascinating. And do you think that Nietzsche, on one hand, Nietzsche could solve that with his spectaclism idea that there is no single truth and so on, and that's applied for theology and philosophy, but at the same time, it's created a problem because you have to create your own value and create your own truth. So that's the concept of individualism. I don't know how it's going to fit with that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what I was trying to do was exactly answer that objection. That scientific paradigms shift over time. And why do we even need any kind of correspondence between a scientific theory that may change over time and a verse of the Quran that we may read in one way today and find meaning in it that is different from how people found meaning in it in the past, and different from how people might find meaning in it in the future. And if we were to look at this kind of correspondence, then what would the Quran have meant to people who lived in completely different scientific paradigms? And what I'm saying is that I'm actually trying to subjectivize the whole enterprise and personalize it. So that we live in a world that speaks to us in many different ways, and among them now is scientific. It's natural to want to understand God's revelation in light of what we know at some level. And yeah, and in this particular case, a scientific level. So if I happen to find some correspondence in that, and it increases my iman today, that's perfectly fine, even though someone else does not find correspondence in it and has other ways of boosting their iman. And at any given time, and in the future someone may look at these ayat completely differently, and in the past they looked at it very differently. But at any given time, if there are a sufficient number of ayat in the Quran that can give anybody the conviction, however they arrive at it, that it's of divine origin in a meaningful way, then that the Quran can do that over periods of time and across cultures and centuries is the interesting point. And when I say this, I'm actually conceding that the Quran will not be unique, that other religious scriptures would make the same claim. And that's perfectly fine. Ahlan wa sahlan. We meet in the field of persuasive discourse, and that's the arena of faith.
I'm certainly not saying that that we should take on Nietzsche's understanding of metaphysics or values or whatever, but I'm just pointing out that he's often taken as exemplary of a certain kind of beauty, and he's this individual that people always point to as being kind of paradigmatically engaged in critical studies. But I'm just pointing out that at least one reading of his method, if we push it to a certain extent, it ends up sounding not so much like the critical approach, but rather like the apologetic approach. And so the two end up strangely kind of mirror images of each other at the opposite ends kind of thing. So I'm not saying that we should, or even that Arun is saying that we should end up thinking in our ethics or whatever, but just that methodologically, there's something interesting going on.
I actually have a comment for the class, but I'll do it in the form of a question. Your presentation about how history sees the signs, the visible signs, as evidence of the invisible reminds me so much of Surah Ar-Rahman, that Allah begins by pointing out the visible signs, the blessings that we know of, asks the rhetorical question, which of your favors will your Lord deny? And then ends up numbering the invisible blessings promised to us with the same question. And I just want to know, did you think of the same thing, and would you think it's worth mentioning in your analysis of mercy? Or did Nursi himself mention it?
This is certainly a good topic. I'm good with good point. I think it's very interesting. And my treatment here was meant to be exhaustive with Nursi. He may be mentioning, but I don't know. I can't think of it now. But there's this sense that over and over again there are signs here. And you can't believe life after death, or even unseen. God is unseen. So you can't believe in unseen without having these clues all around you. And that's a major thing. But when I grew up, yes, and that's something we see. It re-emphasizes in the modern age.
One needs to be correct in a comparison between physical pain and suffering that comes from revelation.
Just a little bit louder.
Sorry? Yeah, you mentioned a comparison between physical suffering that comes from revelation to the Prophet and physical suffering, or so to say, that theology should bear. Could you please elaborate on that?
That was probably the most worked over section, most worked over section that I had in that particular presentation, because I wanted to draw some sort of symbolic attention to the fact that when revelation arrives, right, we have various hadith that report, right, that there is this very physical experience of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually undergoes. And if we are trying to imagine this dialogue, right, that this first moment, this first occasion of revelation, and also a paradigm of how we as human beings should be in theology, that I would like to imagine that any theologian trying to respond to God must try to kind of put themselves into that same position in which the Prophet himself was. And it's not as if revelation has the same impact, right? There's a temporal distance now. And that when revelation speaks to us, there's not necessarily that physical pain, but there is pain in the world. There is suffering in the world. And so I try to choose my words words carefully there, right? To have a share of suffering in the world. I think just to be human, to be created, is to, in some way suffer, even if it's this notion of suffering through separation, right, from the Creator, that distance that's there. But I think there needs to be this element, this shared suffering has to somehow reflect that we aren't just doing theology because of how I experience things, that I'm part of a larger community or a larger world, and that notion of sharing that suffering needed to be in there. But I'm not quite sure if my pinpoint, right, physical pain of suffering is the best way to do that. So I'm quite willing to kind of reimagine that, right, that particular moment. Thank you very much.
You were talking, mind your Cyprus is whenever he's talking about how we so bring whenever you say something, I would always say
Everyone just has to speak louder.
yeah, so in those respects, I see in part, an example of that, because whenever he talks about how the explosion and so on, it actually comes at the end of a session where he enters into this sadness and imagining how, he's, in one piece he's reflecting how the animals are dying out in the winter. There's like insects, things are passing, and he's there, he's all approaching death. You're like, you're a believer, aren't you? But he goes through that, and he's having that pain in that darkness. This verse came to my ear, I'm hoping this up to me. So he goes through that. So as you were talking about pain, maybe that's related to what you were.
If I could just take my privilege here, standing as moderator. One of the questions that just keeps listening to all of you talk and respond, one of the questions that keeps coming to me is this idea of where does faith come from? And Mohan, you were talking about the fact that, well, maybe the fact that what the Qur'an says about iron corresponds to something we know today might subjectively, for you, improve your faith or increase your faith. And that's, in some ways problematic, right? Because you're switching the epistemological category. So you're saying, I believe in the Qur'an because it accords with this other body of knowledge, which I therefore take as a standard of truth. And so, therefore, because it accords with this, right? So there's an epistemological problem there. But I get it. But does it come from that? Right? Or does it come from, as Sayyid Nursi says, looking at the beauty of life and saying, well, I have to believe in the hereafter because this life is so beautiful. God has given us this. He's clearly merciful. He would not cut us off from this. But I think it's interesting that, and I tremble with fear when I try to speak about Christian theology here, and so I will do it very tentatively. But I believe it's St. Anselm's idea that it's precisely that human beings don't experience what they long for in this world that makes you believe in the next. So humans long for justice, for real justice, and yet we know that we live in a world where it is very rare that true justice is accomplished, right? Or we long for beauty, but we know beautiful things die or they decay. And so it's almost the flip, right? So St. Nurse is saying life is so beautiful, I know it must continue. And Anselm, is saying that life is it falls so far short of our desires that there must be another life. It's almost an inverse, right? Or Martin really saying that faith has to come from, to understand this faith, we have to put ourselves back into the position of the prophet and feel that power of the Qur'an, feel that moment, feel that response. And I kind of want to maybe think about this as we go through other talks as well tomorrow, because the Qur'an doesn't answer that question, I don't think. Does it come from proof? Well, Abraham gives his people a lot of very solid proofs, and they're not convinced at the end. I mean, they know they can't argue with them, right? They're dumbfounded, right? But they just walk away. They don't change. Moses performs, how many miracles in front of Pharaoh, and he doesn't change. So the question is, where does that faith come from? And I just sort of see that as a theme in what you're saying. But, go ahead, you want to?
Go ahead.
Actually, I published, I myself. short when I was talking about Muslim. He actually has that.
He has a psychiatric.
There's psychiatric pieces that must be one, but then you see how the world is not leaving us. It's not. There's a longing for more, and that takes it. But at the end of the day, what I would say, what you're saying as longing is still something that you experience on the basis of which you, if you choose to, I mean, you don't need that. You jump because it's unsafe. So there's still some data that you not scientific, but you know, it's something that
It's a trace. It's a
yeah, it's a fear.
Can I? Yeah. So, okay. I just want to pick up on how it was formulated. That because I see that science is saying this and it corresponds to the text, therefore I believe. That's completely not what I want to drive at, but it's very good that you pointed out because I should clarify. It's one of the things that I also see. And if it weren't there, it would not bother me. Like if tomorrow they were to find, it's actually not iron, it's, you know, zinc. Zinc is too close, like it actually was really carbon. It stopped there. I would say, oh, oops, okay, well, the verse still works, right? My faith wasn't hinging on it, but it was strengthened by it in some way, perhaps, right? And so, what is faith, and where does it come from? I'm just reminded of Al-Ghazali, who said, how can I figure this out? And he said he can. It's just a light that God puts in your heart. And he talks about this accumulation of subjective experiences. So like the way you interact with your mother, or the way that your friend approached you, and how it relates to a certain verse. We're doing it all the time. And ilmi should be taken as one of those kinds of, I think, events, rather than as an objective statement that proves or negates truth. I have one line in my paper, the last paragraph, which I didn't read because I thought I'd quit while I'm ahead, because it was really bad. But I'll read the first part of it. As a final point, and if you want to know the second part, you can ask me later. As a final point, I would venture to posit that tafsir ilmi, in a sense, and I'm playing with this, may approximate highly mystical types of subjective exegesis when it admits that it is dealing primarily with isharat, not proofs. And so that's an interesting, where you have highly objective scientific discourse leading to a very subjective, personal relation with the text. And I think that can develop, perhaps.
Yeah, I thought it comes from, I think as you mentioned, as Ghazali mentioned, it's a moment of truth-making, but that continually needs to be reinvigorated. And this is why the text mentions it's a tafkira, it's a remembrance. So maybe one time it's a scientific glimpse, another time it's you see that kind of suffering and you feel that kind of attachment and you do something about it. It's different flavors and it depends on the person. I mean, when I was studying engineering, those scientific clues in the text, they really attract me so much. But maybe for somebody who's not an engineer, who's not doing the science all the time, they wouldn't feel that same kind of wow, you know. Somebody else, it would be maybe a philosophical, you know, touch or something. So I think it's something that keeps us going. And then with time, you build the trust, and which I think you mentioned, the issue of trust. It doesn't come right away. It needs to be built, and those signs are constantly there to establish that kind of connection. So you know who you're dealing with, I mean, who is that creator, which at the end, you know, you have more solidified faith or more solidified trust because of those clues that you keep searching for here and there. You're searching for them, and we need them because otherwise it dies out. So, thank you. Yes.
We have to give the microphone to Dr. Hussain.
I'm confused listening to the first speaker and the last speaker. You were giving instances of natural phenomena occurred in a very critical way when the modern science is totally based on reductionism has come to a standstill. Philosophers all over the world and neuroscientists have acknowledged it. Why? There are two instances that has made them understand and believe that reductionism works wonderfully up to a point.
What is it? What is it?
Up to a point. Reductionism.
Reductionism, okay.
So what is the alternative? There are two incidents which have occurred that are historically very important. One is the quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, non-locality. Two photons, if they are produced from a single source, they are joined together. But if you separate them, they are joined together. If you take them away millions, thousands of miles apart, they are joined together. This has baffled the scientific world. Einstein discovered it. One of the discoverers of this phenomenon is Einstein. Max Planck and Schrödinger, but they have not found any solution to this reality. This is the reality of particle physics. This has baffled us for the last 100 years. If this theory has been tested all over the world during this 100 years, it is the most confirmed theory in modern science, and no answers to it. So reductionism has come to an end, run its course. Now we are entering into non-reductive phenomena. And the most baffling phenomenon throughout human history has been consciousness. We are talking about al-shahada, Dr. Isra was referring to, and that should lead us to Alimul Ghaib. What is the answer for Mursi to this baffling question, which is baffling all the modern scientists, especially neuroscientists, and they are entering into atheism because there is no solution as to how to believe in something which is unseen. I can believe in something which is tangible, and how the brain forms concepts about what you see. But how does the mind form a concept about the unseen? So all these examples of al-hadith and all other natural phenomena is interesting. Qur'an is full of this. It is referring to natural phenomena time after time in a number of ways. But then it should refer to the unseen, then only it has meaning. So the capacity of the mind to have such this jump, to make an intellectual jump from what you see to what you don't see. Example.
Just because there's another speaker as well, so sorry. Another question.
Every one of us knows what infinity is. How do you arrive at the concept of infinity which you cannot touch and feel? Only still it's a scientific fact. No scientist can refute it. It's a very good example of human capacity to do it. So the recent theory on consciousness has solved both problems in quantum mechanics and in cognitive science. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A very quick question and a comment. Actually, I agree with her because even if you're studying science, mathematics, you're studying mathematics, let's say for 30, 40 years, and if you come to the elegance of mathematics, there is a moment of enlightenment. So that is the moment, like the Quran points out, is we should not underestimate about the surah and the scientific facts of the Quran. And the question I had for Dr. Mahan is about, have you explored this, the molecular weight of iron is exactly the same as the surah name.
That's it. It's open and closed.
Okay. Dare I say yes? But that I actually left that out from my paper. That was the other part of that paragraph. And here was my point. They're not the same.
You know, the same.
No. It's off by one. So 57:25 is the surah. Now I'm into total ishara mode. Okay, and it's kind of like haruf stuff, so we're out there. And 56 is the atomic weight of iron instead of 57, so it's off by one. And 26 is the atomic number of iron, not 25, so it's off by one. And for me, this actually, what it was saying was, there is no proof. Never call it a proof.
Science is wrong.
No, not science is wrong.
The number of the Qur'an is wrong.
See,
Don't count the fact.
one conclusion would be, if you allow me just 1 second. One conclusion would be, man, they got the periodic table wrong. Right? Another conclusion would be, you know what? It's not meant to be exact and precise. And this is, again, telling me, if you're looking for it, don't look for it here. It's only a sign. If you're convinced by this, if it helps you, mashallah. If not, you know, may you get signs in other places. Yeah.
Yes.
I want as a Christian to say thank you to Martin Wynne for evoking so powerfully the disrupting effect of revelation in our living in this world and evoking faith. And then I want to go on to say that faith is not just a state of being, a condition, but that faith, if it has to do with trust, is placed in, it's a response to, it rests somewhere. And so the inquiry has to go on into the nature of that one who evoke the faith and in whom our faith is invested. But I want to also, I didn't learn your name, but thank you for giving us diversity on the question of finitude. And because it's a deadline, I'm 70. Death is nearer than it was when I was 20. So I'm doing more to get right with my brothers and dispose better of my wealth. Finitude helps you live. But I thank you and Said Nursi also for making me realize that this boundary earth is not big enough for love that I'm capable of participating in. Thank you.
Yes, one final question.
Sure, I think from what I heard previously, I was sharply reminded of the classical Mu'tazili discourse of reason or intellect being given numbers over text. And it also reminds me of Ibn Taymiyyah when he tries very well to interpret that discourse in line with the Ash'ari in a way, went further to say that when the intellect and the text and the revelational text like the Qur'an and the intellect clashes, he believes that the text must be given preponderance over the intellect because we have already accepted a text as emanating from the Creator, indicating that since the Creator is the originator and He created everything, He knows the origin of everything, probably it is the intellect that falls short of understanding what the Creator means by a specific revelation that sounds a little strange to our intellect. All the same, when we look at Quran chapter 41, verse 53, where Allah says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ, we shall show them our signs in the horizons, وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, and in themselves, حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقِّ, until it becomes clear to them that it is true. You can tell from this verse that the signs, as you mentioned previously, actually can be miracles in themselves, or can be signs that allude to something else, that point to something else. And the purposes of these signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed us, either in the heavens or in ourselves, be they theoretical scientific facts, which are assessment, because they are speculations, right? Theoretical scientific facts are assessments and speculations. And so with time, they fade, because they are just speculations and theories. Or be they hard found facts, like 1 + 1 is 2. Either they are speculative, or they are true hard facts that cannot be disputed. The Quran is trying to point to the fact that the intellect cannot really reign supreme over the text. So what we Muslims actually do is we hold on to the scientific proven facts, not the speculative scientific theories. Because when we hold on to that, and that is exactly what you're saying, they may pass and we will be left in the lurch. But when we hold on to the scientific proven facts, like 1 + 1 is 2, like other hard scientific facts, of course, they serve to prove or to buttress or to bring them in to the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the truth of the Quran.
I would say that from Bruce's perspective, it's really hard to, reduce this to this disagreement between Mu'tazila versus Ash'ari, because this interaction with the text and intellect. First of all, in the presentation here, Bruce is not just engaging reason, rationality, but intellect, but heart as well. Who yearns for eternity? It's not rational. It's part of human nature. So it's heart speaking there. So it's not just this. We're not just talking about this dry reasoning. That's one thing. The other thing is the Quran itself keeps making this claim, because you can't take. How can you tell you, right? Someone so emphasizing Iman al-Tahqiqi, he would say, on what basis do you accept this text in the first place? Right? Why do I care about this text so much? I have to have reasons for it. It shouldn't be that I'm born in Turkey, Istanbul, that's why. And if I was born in China, I wouldn't care about this text. That's fine as a starting point, that's where we all have our localities, but then Bruce presses for that you have to think about it. You have not think only in an exclusive, like intellectually, in a dry sense, but in all sense, and that includes rationality, but not just limited to it, and heart, and then practice.
Thank you. I think we will end our session now. Thank you all for your questions and for your attention. And of course, thank you to our wonderful speakers for their papers.